OBN Horn of Africa. This is our weekly program, Diplomacy, and I'm Fantombelete hosting this program. Today, we will be discussing Ethiopia's diplomatic relations with global superpowers. My special guest today is Abiot Desta, Assistant Professor, Foreign Policy Researcher, Diplomatic Trainer, and Policy Consultant. Abiot, very warm welcome to this program.
Thank you.
As I said, we will be discussing Ethiopia's diplomatic relations with global superpowers. Before we move to that, we will start discussing Ethiopia's recent achievements in the last 6 years. Could you highlight some of the diplomatic achievements, the significant diplomatic achievements Ethiopia has registered in the last 6 years, please?
Okay, thank you again for having me here to discuss this very important topic. And as you know, Ethiopia is known to be a hub of diplomacy in foreign service in Africa and beyond. And Ethiopia has established a very important historical base for diplomatic relations in Africa and beyond. And it has continued over the years, over the decades. And it has seen a number of achievements while also facing a number of challenges. But we can say that yes, Ethiopia's diplomacy has showed a very exceptional resilience with the coming into power of the current regime since 2018. And we can highlight some of the most important critical diplomatic achievements of the country, as possibly since 2018, even if it has got long background backward, right? And we can raise about achievements in areas of peace deals Ethiopia has engaged in, and we really have discussed this topic several times, and it has been appreciated elsewhere in the world and in Africa. And the initiative the regime took to establish a peaceful relation with Eritrea, ending 20 years of stalemate, is always worth mentioning, right? For which, in fact, the regime obtained, including Peace Nobel Prize back in 2019. Right? So we can start from this peace deals, and the peace deals continue to many other countries in Africa and beyond. And we can raise the peace deal again reached just within Ethiopia, but also with the support of external powers that occurred in Pretoria. And therefore the peace deals that reached in Pretoria for cessation of hostility to end war in Tigray is another important achievement, right? That is still actually ongoing, very important. And recently, Ethiopia's initiative in this area to establish peaceful relations with neighboring countries includes neighboring Somalia, and the recent Ankara agreement, Ankara declaration with the mediating role of Erdogan is very important and worth mentioning, because it has really put into a pacifying, basket, rather than the several otherwise discussed adversely about Ethiopia-Somalia relation. And therefore the initiative the regime took in terms of establishing peaceful relation with neighboring Somalia is very, very critical and just recent. Having said this, we can also talk about Ethiopia's achievement in areas of economic diplomacy. That's very critical, economic diplomacy, right? Ethiopia has had economic relations with several countries, major powers, middle powers, neighboring countries, but especially Ethiopia's achievement in terms of reaching a more favorable, positive deal with the IMF recently in order to attract loan and support. Just in 2024 is really worth mentioning. And just recently, before 2 days, there is also, I think, a discussion to facilitate the release of, I think, the second round allocated programmatic loan amount to Ethiopia's government, which supports Ethiopia's base of foreign reserve. That is very critical, right? So in terms of boosting its financial capacity, and especially foreign reserve, and again investment, this is very critical. Ethiopia's relation with the IMF, and also the relaxation of the financial governance system in liberalizing the financial sector is very important, right? In terms of, for example, clearing out black markets and putting into the market operation, yes, and therefore governing currency is an important move forward in this regard, right? That has also must have done an important thing to do with IMF to get positive impression from IMF, World Bank, and other donors, we could say. The other actual economic diplomacy achievements can be raised is Ethiopia's increasingly growing relation with the Middle East in terms of attracting, again, especially development assistance and attract investments. And this includes UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey itself, right? With different capacities and capabilities. Especially UAE is very much significant in terms of contributing to Ethiopia's initiative in improving investment and enabling the economy to move forward, right? This can be mentioned in different areas, right? The other is Ethiopia's established economic relation with China, a very growing trade volume and a very expanding investment, foreign direct investment with China. These are very important gains.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our discussion, which is Ethiopia's diplomatic relations with global superpowers. What are Ethiopia's interests and objectives in the relationship with these global superpowers?
Okay, thank you very much. Ethiopia's priorities with major superpowers, middle powers, and other powers doesn't differ actually, but the extent, the degree differs. But that why are these superpowers and why are they said to be superpowers and who are they? First, I think we are referring to the three major global powers currently: the United States of America,
China,
EU, and China, as you have mentioned. And why have they become superpowers, or why are they so named superpowers? First, their economic size, the economy, the size of the economy. It is very important. Military size and the sophistication of the military technology. It is very important. The other is the level of science, technology, and innovation in these countries, including advancements in digital technology, space science, artificial intelligence, right? It is very important. And the other is, their legacy itself. The history they have left behind since history, especially when it comes to Europe, for example. This is a legacy region. You can take colonialism. Europe colonized the rest of the world, and eventually return it back. But it didn't take out all of its footage and identities from the colonized countries. It left behind lots of legacies, the culture, the politics, the economy, the tied relationship, which you cannot really put aside and continue to play roles in shaping the behavior of states in colonized countries. It is very critical. And because of all of these things, at least these four things, these major powers play great influence on the rest of the world. And for this, we refer to them as major powers. They are influential, their economy is superb. These are trillion dollars economies, right? So we say, but why Ethiopia? Having and establishing diplomatic relationship with superpowers. Again, we can also start about Ethiopia from legacy. This is also a legacy country, the history of independence, and therefore has confidence in international relations or in world forums, in presenting itself. A strong legacy, right? History of connectedness with the rest of the world, including Africa, the US, Europe, beyond formal diplomatic agreements. It is very important. The other is geopolitics and geoeconomics. The location of Ethiopia in the middle of the global map, existing as a regional polis very next to the Bab el-Mandeb trade paths or trade ways over the Red Sea, between Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. The major trade route. Ethiopia has ever been regional police and playing roles in securing this trade route and therefore safeguarding the interests of traders, major powers, Europe, United States, including China. They are major trading partners to each other. For example, Europe currently imports major goods and commodities from China, while the US imports from Europe or the European Union, right? And therefore it is important, the geopolitics. And the other is Ethiopia's legacy in Africa. And Ethiopia hosts the African Union, and Ethiopia can be considered a gate guard, or you can say a gateway to Africa. And you can use this analogy simply, saying like an eye is a gateway to the soul. You can consider Ethiopia like that. And it remains to be critical, in addition to Ethiopia's role in facilitating, supporting, and really encouraging the independence of African countries, for which, in fact, it has won the seat for AU, its headquarters. So this is it. But what are the criteria for which we assess the major powers? The major powers for having relationship with Ethiopia. What are the criteria? What are the areas of diplomatic relations? We raise trade. We raise foreign direct investment. We raise foreign aid. We raise regional peace and security agenda. We raise migration, which is very critical. We also raise currently climate diplomacy, environmental cooperation. And we can also raise as a criteria for establishing ties, history, I have been mentioning earlier. The role history plays in connecting or in maintaining countries connected in terms of as systems or as cultural connections, just globally. So these 7 things are very important. And when we look at these things, at least when we look at some of the major of these things, when we start from trade, currently Ethiopia's trade aligns with the interests of China, and therefore China emerges as the major trading partner for Ethiopia. And the volume of trade is much higher. And the share of trade in percentage is also higher. And the number of trade agreements are also multiple. While, for example, Ethiopia has only one formal diplomatic agreement with EU and one with the US, no more than one. Otherwise, Ethiopia makes diplomatic relations with the EU and the US through multilateral relationships. For example, Ethiopia is a member of COMESA and the US has agreement with COMESA, then Ethiopia gets its benefits through COMESA. Or the EU has other agreements at Africa level and Ethiopia is a member of that, and therefore it gets its benefits through that system. Otherwise, direct agreement with EU and the US are only one trade. I think the US is said to be the Treaty of Amity in 1951, and that was revised in 1994. Only this. And I think the trade agreement with the EU is only one, and that is referred to as EBA, or everything but arms, meaning everything we can trade between each other, but we cannot accommodate arms trade, military armaments, or chem and many other things, everything related to the military sector. So through EBA, yes, Europe indeed has a trade relationship with Ethiopia, and in fact, Europe emerges as, or the European Union overall, excluding the UK, right, emerges as the second trading partner for Ethiopia's goods and commodities, next to China. Ethiopia actually exports much to the EU. The other is FDI. Again, when we come to FDI, foreign direct investment, China is the largest investor in Ethiopia. And China has hundreds of companies in Ethiopia. The actual fact and the figures you can identify, but they are in hundreds. And the Europeans and the US companies in terms of this are fewer in terms of FDI, foreign direct investment. And the areas of investment is also fewer. But the issue is that where does China invest and where do others invest? The US, EU. It is also important to see it qualitatively. For example, what I personally appreciate about the EU's investment in Ethiopia is that they focus on the manufacturing sector and they focus on investment in education and the development of human capacity, human development, human capital, as well as job creation. For example, the EU has this project of, I think, currently existing job pact for Ethiopian growing job-seeking population. Saying this, we can go to the third, which is foreign aid. In terms of foreign aid, China comes third, and the US becomes the largest donor of Ethiopia. And it comes as loan, grants, or development assistance, or humanitarian assistance. And the upper handedness or the superiority of the US aid lies here. And most of it is assistance, is humanitarian. And for example, in 2024, if I'm not mistaken, the US must have pledged some 3 billion or more USD to or for Ethiopia. A comparable amount is there for the EU. The EU actually, I've said, investment is more of human development and also supporting peace and security agenda, right? It is important. And the fourth thing is, in fact, peace and security agenda. Again, on the fourth issue, the US now comes as, yes, the primary partner in promoting regional peace and security in the Horn of Africa, including the fight against terrorism. And therefore, we have been in Somalia, and we were, in fact, in other countries by sending troops. So that, yes, we show our participation and significance in not only peace in Africa, but also at the global level. Ethiopia participates in UN peacekeeping missions. And by the way, here it is important to mention that Ethiopia's diplomacy pursues this philosophy of defensive realism other than offensive. At home, Ethiopia tries to build capacity, but it doesn't use that capacity to
offend others.
Or attack and yes, yeah.
Rather, it uses its powers to just defend itself.
To defend, and in that sense, Ethiopia has remained to be a very strong country in terms of that. So that is important, right? In this regard, by the way, the United States of America wants Ethiopia to be strong in the areas of playing roles in securing regional peace and security, because I have said to you that, yes, Ethiopia acts as a regional police, including regional anchor in the world of Africa, because of its geopolitical location, geo-economic location. Yes, very next to the Bab el Mandeb, right? It is very important. The EU also wants Ethiopia in this regard. In the meantime, especially the EU wants Ethiopia to be internally peaceful, not only in terms of this relationship with neighbors, which links this to the idea of migration. By this time, not only Europe, the United States also appears to be fed up with migration.
Yeah.
And welcoming these refugees or asylums or any what is so-called illegal migrants or irregular movements of people. And you can watch what Trump is doing this week. Yes, sending back immigrants home with even some inhumanitarian treatment elements that can show, right? So the EU wants citizens to remain at home, and for that, the peace condition at home is important for the EU, right? And EU extended support to promote internal peace and security, and the EU's support seems to be, for me, genuine in this regard, much genuine for me. That's my position. In terms of this, Chinese involvement is rather thin, not thick, much thin in terms of this, given China's focus on trade and investment, much more, which is economy, more or less exclusively, right? So this is important. So the other factor is migration. When it comes to migration, Europe becomes the first global power in order to cooperate with Ethiopia, in order to contain migration through other means, one of which is what I have said, promoting peace and security at home and at region, in the Horn of Africa, right? So EU becomes number one in establishing cooperation on migration with Ethiopia, including supporting refugees. Recently, Ethiopia received some support in some $1 million for supporting refugees in Gambela, if you have heard.
Yeah.
Very recently.
Very recently, yes.
Yeah, very recently. And there are a number of programs and projects in this regard. And the EU intervenes in those areas and therefore really tops the rank, followed by now the United States, previously not. As you know, Ethiopia's migration or movement of people to China is more or less, given our history, low, and therefore a little cooperation, not really that strong as the EU and the US. So in terms of this, we can really see Ethiopia's relationship with the major powers. Migration is a topical issue. And finally, the evolution, the history I have said. History itself ties Ethiopia to major global powers, and it goes beyond formal relationships. Historically, Ethiopia started formal relationship with the UK, and that was signed in 1841, before the colonization of Africa. And before 1841, Ethiopia had been in contact with Europeans, and there is a lot that Ethiopia has established with Europe culturally. And as a result, Ethiopia's education is, for example, modeled around European curriculum and American curriculum. And therefore, it really determines human capital development in Ethiopia, approaches to human capital development, approaches to science, technology, and innovation in Ethiopia. The cultural ties are important. And I add one point, and this must be the ACE factor, that is, the political system, the orientation of the political system. Ethiopia, appeals to be and aspires for democracy and good governance. In terms of this, as you know, they are the West. Definitely the European Union, including UK, and the United States, whom we recognize as democratic regions or democracies more generally. And viewed from this, the Chinese repertoire appears to be much low because of the political system it pursues. Despite its achievement, its global reach in terms of economy, the ACE factor. And again, in terms of this, Ethiopia tends to gravitate towards the EU, the UK, and the US. And therefore, here, when we talk about Ethiopia's ties, Ethiopia's diplomatic relationship with major global powers, it is here that we must ask and find answers for what do we want to choose, or what do we choose. There is this dictum in diplomacy: if you can't do it, you will do it. Then what will we do in terms of the areas of engagement we are supposed to be? Thank you.
Abiyoth Dasta, Assistant Professor, Foreign Policy Researcher, Diplomatic Trainer, and Policy Consultant, thank you for your deep insights.
Thank you very much.
Dear viewers, this brings us to the end. Thank you for watching this program and stay connected with other programs of OBN Horn of Africa.